So hey guys, this is Reverend Sean over the Center Path, and today we're going to talk a little bit about what can't be answered in Buddhism, or what actually the Buddha refused to answer and why. So the Buddha had really four, depending on how you pan this out, 4 to 14 questions that he refused to answer, and I'm going to explain a little bit about those questions and kind of why they're not answerable, and they really are not a part of the philosophical dialogue, if you will, of Buddhist teaching, including Zen, Chan, Mahayana, Theravada, and Vajrayana. Now, different groups, of course, say that they have the answer, that the answer showed up later in more secret teachings and things like that. We're not going to go into those because those are not really considered the core of Orthodox Buddhism. Okay, so the Buddha himself had basically 2 lessons he wanted to give people. And he explained this in his first sermons, in first few sermons actually. And many times later than that, he would explain that he is just explaining the causes of suffering and then how to get away from suffering. That was really the 2 main things. So it's really like, what is stress and how to get out of stress. Anything other than that was just fluff. And he knew that, and he did explain that many times. There's one of the parable of the handful of leaves, where he picked up a handful of leaves to explain that this is the stuff that I've taught you. These are the things that you need to know. Although there are many leaves on the ground and there are many leaves in the trees, this is what you need to know. And that's an important distinction, because people keep wanting to add stuff to it. And they want to add stuff, well, there were secret leaves, and there was leaves that they walked on that were important, and there's leaves that are in the sky that haven't developed yet, they're important. These are the secret ones. Those are not important. That gets really into a more esoteric version of those ideas. And we don't need to be putting those too much in our thought process, because they tend to become what are called fermentations or fetters, or things that slow you down on this path. So we're really talking about 3 or 4 different sutras. There's the Sabbasava Sutra, and the Agi Vachagata Sutra, and the Kula Malankuvada Sutra. Those are the kind of 3 main ones that explain this kind of idea. The 4 questions really, which again you can interpolate, not interpolate, but you can really expand them to be a bunch of different questions. Because the first one is the cosmos, is the universe infinite, or is it finite? That's the second part of it. Or is it neither infinite or finite, or is it both finite and infinite? Those were some of the questions. Now, the way this started out was some of the followers were like, well, if he can't answer these, then I'm not going to follow him. And he has to give up his teaching and say that he can't actually know all the answers. He never said he knew all the answers. He said he had the answers for the relief of suffering through the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, etc. Okay, so that's the process of basic Buddhism. So when we get into these, like, when did the universe begin? This is the same thing. When will it end? These are the same. That's exactly the same question. Is it? Does it have a beginning? Does it have an end? Is it infinite? Is it finite? And these are things that they would ask and say, like, haha, I gotcha. You can't answer this question. But he wouldn't answer it. And he would tell them, as you read through these sutras, that there's a reason I didn't tell you. The number one reason is because it's not needed in this process. You don't need to know if the universe was developed or not developed, or who made it or who didn't make it, or anything like that, in order to continue on. How does that relate to any daily suffering? That is actually a hindrance of ours when we have this daily suffering, and then we go like, well, I wonder if the universe is just going to end, and then I'm all out of it and I don't have to worry about it anymore. That's a nihilistic kind of thinking, and that's not part of the Buddhist training. Now, we talk about it as a dualism as well, like I am part of the universe is part of me, etc., those kind of things. But we don't use that as our stability point, our foundation of this teaching. The foundation of the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, that there is suffering, not that life is suffering, not that everything is suffering. Get rid of that in your head, because it's just that there is suffering. Suffering exists. The truth, the noble truth of suffering. There is suffering. That's the first one. The second one, that suffering has a cause. Now, we can go to a whole discussion about what the causes of suffering are, which are like, greed and anger and avarice and jealousy and attachment and those kind of things, that's a different conversation. Then the third part, of course, there's a way out of suffering, and the way out of suffering is the Eightfold Path. Eightfold Path. You look at the other videos. By the way, if you're watching this, hopefully you're enjoying this kind of information. It kind of gets your brain going a little bit. Let's give us a thumbs up and a subscribe, so you'll make sure to get the other ones that I've done. And I'm continuing on with these. I've got many that are already planned and pre-planned, and some of them have to be re-edited and stuff like that, like this one. But I'm trying to get to my 1,000 or 5,000 subscriber community, so we can have this all work as one thing, and we can start to learn a little bit about the basics of Buddhism without all of the fluff. Not that the fluff is useless. The fluff is very important, because some of that, the procedures, the processes, the ceremonies, the traditions, the lore, the myth are all super, super important in the guise of understanding this on your own level and finding value in your own level. Like, how do you find value? If you find something very important, how do you make it important without some kind of ceremony? A ceremony is an important thing. It's not bad. Okay, for those of you who are secular Buddhists or want to be secular Buddhists or think you're atheist Buddhist or whatever it is, you're missing out if you're negating those things. Now, it doesn't mean you're saying like there's no use for the devas and there's no use for reincarnation and rebirth and stuff like that. There is, at least philosophically, and at least a way of discussion and explaining it to people. Okay, so there we go. That's really the first of our what are they called? The unknowables, right? So, is the universe finite? Does it have an end? Is it infinite? Does it have no end? Does it have a beginning? Does it have an end? Does it have? Does it go on forever? Does space go on forever? Okay, is it infinite in space? These are the kind of questions that are unanswerable, primarily because no one's been there, and no one can be there. And really remember that Buddhism also, the locus of control is directly with the individual practicing, not anybody else. No one else can give you the Dharma. No one else can give you the understanding of the teachings. Even though they say like the transmission of all this kind of stuff and things like that, that can help you. However, unless you do something with it, it doesn't do anything. Okay, it's just like me having this, this cup here, which you could probably tell is probably coffee. But inside, you don't know if it's coffee. Is it tea? Is it hot chocolate? Is it beer? You don't know. You don't know until I tell you. But even then, you don't know, because I could show you coffee that looks like tea, or I could show you tea that looks like coffee, etc. It's things like that. And until you've actually held it in your hand, you don't know how hot it is, or cool it is, or how heavy it is, or how dense it feels, or what else is in it, until you taste it. Same thing with this. And remember that Buddhism itself is very 100% experiential. You experience every bit of it. It gets deep, it gets weird, it gets confusing, and that's part of the plan. That's part of actually the process. If you're having trouble with meditations, for example, or you're having trouble with understanding some of the concepts, bring it back to yourself and sit with it. That's the contemplative part, right? The samatha and vipassana. That's where we get some insight into these things, and that's where we can actually expand on our knowledge of those kinds of teachings. Okay, so question number one was, what is the cosmos? Is the universe finite or infinite? Okay, is it finite? Is the universe finite in time? Does time have a beginning? Does time have an end? So again, we go back to this one here, present moment. That's all that matters. That's all we're talking about. That's all we're trying to get to. We're not trying to stop everything. We're not trying to stop. We're just trying to get to the present moment. Okay. The next one is the self different from the body. This goes back to the Anattakalana Sutra. Okay, the body is not the self. The body with the self, one could say the body could be like this or body be like that. It's because it's not the self, it's subject to suffering and blah, 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 etc. You can look those ones up too on the playlist. You can see those because I've done more videos on that. If you want a kind of a cheat sheet of all this stuff, there's one on the website, thecenteredpath.org. Look for downloads, and in there you'll see a couple different downloads. I did one on history too of Buddhism or something like that. Those are totally free. Look those up, okay? So that's 1, 2, 3 questions. Last question was, does the Buddha exist after death? Now, the Buddha didn't want to answer these questions. Why? Because it just causes more division. It causes more what's it called? More argument. It causes more discussion. Now, if you look at this last question, does the idea of Buddha, the awakened one, exist after death? Or does it not exist after death? Or does it both exist and not exist after death? Or does it not exist and does it not exist and not exist after death? So it gets confusing, right? And this is where you get your about 14 different actual questions. The Buddha, when he answered these, he said that's just